list. Okay. Let's see if I can get the display to do the right thing here. All right, awesome. Yeah, so I'm looking at the slides. Apparently, I left an extra slide in there that we'll just have to ignore as we go along. Guess that happens when you copy slides from one meeting to the next and you update them. Sometimes you don't update them as perfectly as one would like. Okay, we are actually a couple of minutes after our start time. So this is the Registration Protocols Extensions Working Group. I'm Jim Galvin and Antoine Verschuren, who is remote and up there in the participants. Oh, and now he's waving. Okay, we can see you. You want to speak for a moment? Let's see if your mic works.
Yeah, let's see if it works. Can you hear me?
Yes, but barely. It's actually quite low.
Yeah,
that's the volume in the room. I don't think that's you. I guess if Meet Echo is listening, if we could get the volume in the room adjusted, that would be good. If somebody wants to type at Meet Echo in the Jabber room too, that'd be appreciated. Okay. We'll just move on here. This is the usual note well. Basically, we get your firstborn child. Yes. Oh, it is very. Yeah. Let me see if I can fix the projector here.
It's coming on that screen, but not the projector. The advice is by lowering the resolution on your laptop. Okay, that was better.
Okay, apparently the projector was in a strange mode, but we got past that. We're now up on the screen. Okay, now we get to take your firstborn child if you don't like it. You don't like us, so don't misbehave. Unless you want us to have your child. This is just a note which we've always put in our thing. Some working groups do this, and I know that other groups that have a lot of documents, like to just remind people about document reviews. I mean, we're a pretty small group, close knit, but just a reminder in general. Moving forward and moving documents forward and specifications. It really does help that people review documents, and even just saying a +1. I mean, if you don't have any particular concerns or issues with a document, it's always helpful to just say that, acknowledge that you've looked at it and have no objections when documents are moving forward. And for those who are document editors and authors, it hopefully goes without saying, but, sure, if you're going to put a document out there that you want people to look at, please take the time to look at other people's documents too. It helps. We have been having a little bit of an issue with document shepherds. We kind of struggled with that a little bit here recently. We do have 3 documents right now that are in the publication queue, and they all do have a document shepherd. So we did finally get past it all. But you know, I do want to take an opportunity to encourage people and ask, please, that you do think about doing that. It's not necessarily a lot of work. It does require, the principal responsibilities are that you have to write the summary up that describes the document. If you've ever seen IESG announcements that explain that a document is now an IETF last call and it's on its agenda, I mean, you have to write those words, that summary page that goes there. The other thing that you have to do is when the document is first submitted to the IETF, to the ISG, the ISG does its review, and this is all tracked and it's all online in the data tracker. But as they make comments and if they have questions and concerns, you know, we do look to the document shepherds to track all of that and respond to all of that and make sure to, and on the one hand, your job is to keep the editor of the document honest. You know, you have to make sure that all of the comments and such are addressed and all those concerns are taken care of. So there's just a little bit of, you know, paying attention to the document over hopefully a short period of time, and hopefully it never gets kicked back. So the next slide, this is the version of the 2 meetings slide that we're not having. I should have deleted this one. This is the one, the next slide, slide 5, is really the 2 meeting slide that should be there. We obviously had a session already on Monday. It was a working session. We'll have a few minutes here in a bit to hear about that. And then this is the second session, working group session. And I'm sorry. Oh, no, actually it comes up now. I just remembered, but it's also because we got to get all the way to the agenda here. We're in the middle of welcome and introductions, but I do need a Jabber scribe and a notes taker. Anybody in particular willing to take notes and make sure that we get them? Can I look to our usual suspect is not in the room, or am I missing him? Oh, you'll do notes for us? I'm sorry? Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Ulrich will do notes, and you're going to scribe for us? Okay. Cal's going to scribe for us. So excellent. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. So with that, we'll jump right in here. Document status. We had a document published since our last meeting. Yay for us. Yeah, it's kind of a very very dramatic step for us. We're kind of slow moving here on many things. So, but it was good to get this one finally out the door and done. So that was a good thing. They were labeled here as working group last call documents. But these are the 3 documents. The next set up here are all the documents that are currently in the publication queue. We have the registration fees document and the change poll and allocation token. So the fees document has as a document shepherd Jim Gould, I believe, right? And the change poll is Roger. And allocation token is Patrick. Is he in the room? Okay, so Patrick's not with us here today, but that's, or is he online? I don't see him online, but that's okay. Does anybody want to say anything about the documents that are in the publication queue? Anybody have any words, updates that you want to offer, what the experience has been like so far? So Jim, go ahead.
Yes, Jim Gould from VeriSign. So as a document shepherd for the fees, I'm just going to wait for you to post the last update with my last couple of nits on there, and then I'll go ahead and submit the write-up for it. I have it ready to go.
This is Roger, and I do plan on getting, and I think there were 6 or 7 nits in there, and I'll get those updated this coming week and get them published. My other task this week is actually to get the Shepherd initial review done on the change poll so that we can get schema validated and everything, and the first comments back to you so you can start editing. So,
yeah, good. Thanks very much. Anything else from Anyone? I guess it's really, you two are doing each other's documents there, which is good. That's the way it works. So, Cal?
Just a question from Antoine. So these ones are past working group last call, right?
Yes, they're past working group last call. They're all actually document shepherds are in progress doing their part to prepare their write-ups. They have not actually, I take it back, I made a misstatement before because they have not actually been submitted to the IESG yet. They're waiting for the document shepherds to finish their write-ups, and there were just some nits that they were going through with the editors. And actually, I think the change in allocation are waiting on the chairs to look at your first write-ups, I think. Yeah. So we'll get through those and get that out. And so I expect it within the next week or so, they will get into the ISG queue and be handed up to Adam, and that process will then start. Okay. If that's all there is with that, then we have a couple of documents to walk through here and talk about. We have the validate document. And Roger, I believe you wanted to get up and talk about that. You don't have slides for yours, right?
No.
That's right. Okay. It's
This
Gavin
one.
has slides.
Yeah, I didn't have much to say on this except that there hasn't been a lot of comments on it, but we do have implementation going in the next month or so. So I will be updating the doc with implementation notes and any findings that we actually have. So it'll be prior to the next meeting, and I'm hoping actually by June-ish that we actually have an update doc and a full implementation done on it. So for the validate document. So any questions on validate?
Just one small question.
Yeah. Microphone, please.
Stefan Bartmeyer, AFNEC. Just a question, why the domain name for the contact is called TLD? Because EPP is not only for TLD.
I guess I'm not sure exactly what
Well,
happened.
when you want to validate a contact, you have
Yeah.
to indicate for which domain you want the validation.
Yes.
The example is .com, for instance,
Yep.
.com. And the XML attribute is named TLD.
So
It
that's
should
the
be named
top-
example. It should be named domain, not TLD, because it's not always a TLD.
But that attribute sheet is actually the TLD you want, because we can call into a registry system that supports multiple TLDs, and we want to be able to tell them which TLD.
No, the problem is using TLD instead of the more general domain, because a registration domain is not always a TLD.
Two different ones. So the domain name is one attribute, and the TLD is another. Oh, I'm sorry.
In the registry mapping concepts, you call it zone.
Zone is more correct.
Okay.
yeah.
Instead of TLD, call it zone.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Anything else on validate? No? Okay. Registry mapping, we did meet Monday to work on this. Overview, probably half the time. We just went over what the concept was and everything. And the questions started out a little slow, but it actually picked up quite quickly and some good conversations. Probably the two biggest things, and I've actually heard some things since then as well, is the bootstrapping of it, as I think Cal mentioned on Monday, was how can we get this out? What's the mechanism to get people to see it as soon as possible? From a registrar standpoint, it's nice to have when we have access to the SRS, because then we can see any changes or anything. But a real goal is to have it prior to accessing the SRS, so we can determine if we actually want to support this TLD or not. So, or this zone, however you want to call that. But so one of the big topics, and again, nothing decided, but something to think about is how can we get this out to people? And I would say registrars, but I would say anybody could use it prior to it actually making it into the production SRS. Scott?
Scott Hollenbeck. Interesting that you asked that question.
Mario, Andy Newton, and I had been having a little private conversation amongst ourselves because Mario had suggested that maybe this information could also be published using RDAP. Now, having said that, I think we do have to take a look at the issues that might be associated with client identification, authentication, and access control, though you also just said about the general public. Anyway, I think it's a good topic for conversation.
So Scott, on that same point, actually, is the next other topic to start thinking about is this public information and should it be available to the public, or is there going to be pieces that are private? And I'm not sure that we know that today, but I think it's just something we need to think about as we're going through and designing it. If we're going to add private information, then we're going to have to come up with some other mechanism of supporting it to bootstrap or to provide to the public. So, Jim?
Yeah, it's Jim Gold from VeriSign. So I think fundamentally getting the policies in a structured format is number one. It could be in EPP, it could be in RDAP, it could be in anything you want. So the point is that I think coming in agreement with what those policies, how they can be represented, and you could represent them in any way, shape, or form. You could put it in a Word document, HTML. The point is that I think as far as bootstrapping is concerned, that we could take the structured format and represent it in any way for consumption by a registrar that doesn't have access.
Scott Hollenbeck again. But let me build on that for a minute, Jim. If you want to go with some kind of a structured format, what I would strongly suggest is that we decide on one, right? Because as soon as you get information that is represented in two different ways, or for example, if there are two copies of this, that might exist in different places, the risks associated with maintaining consistency increase greatly, right?
Yeah.
Well, my suggestion is to stick with EPP for right now. Maybe what we can do is come up with we talked about an aggregation pattern. In essence, you may have individual registry systems, each exposing their policies via the EPP. But then if we have aggregation services, whether or not at the registry provider level or at the ICANN level, that can be represented in a different format. And that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and I agree, Scott. I think at least data-wise, that configuration should be in one spot. I mean, if we get to it in multiple different ways, that's okay, I think, as long as the data isn't actually stored in multiple spots. Scribe?
No, actually, I'm speaking as
okay,
Cal
Cal.
in this case. Just on that, and I know I raised this on Monday, I think that logically some of this material, the bootstrap material that I was thinking of was just the bare minimum required to connect to the server in the first place to get potentially more rich policy data later. But when you imagine it and referring to the requirement that we would store this data potentially in the same in two locations or more, but it would have to be consistent. Some of this will have a different level of secrecy, basically. So there may still be a necessity to make some of it public, or at least more public than perhaps a direct connection to an EPP system might require, and the rest would still remain confidential effectively. So we might need to think about that it may not exist in a complete document when it's distributed.
Sure. Yeah, and again, when I say public, I don't know if that means truly public or if it's just accessible in a wider form. So.
Frederic from Ink.VR. I guess if we are thinking in the major use case, the bootstrapping one, it really doesn't make too much sense to put this in the EPP server, actually. The format, I don't mind being XML or whatever, but I don't see too much value for us to spend time here writing a extensive or a large extension just for something that will be used in a pre-EPP situation. So I totally agree with this a single format. I think this is regarding this question of public or private information. This depends on the situation and the agreement that you have with the the pre-agreement that you have with this new registrar, but I think it's valuable work, but I don't see too much value in putting this in actually in the protocol itself. And I see this is probably from the point of view of a server operator like us and others, it's straightforward to do that. But I don't see too much value for especially mid-sized to small registrars, because the amount of intelligence that you will need to put in your software to actually take action in a reactive and online situation it's pretty high, and I guess is a really small amount of them, or even how can I say, open source implementations will get to.
Yeah, thanks. And I think that's a great conversation that we can have, because it is one of those things where the initial use of it would be way prior to any systems connecting. So yeah, that makes sense. The only issue is, you're right, and I've talked to several registrars, and even if they do have some configuration out of it coming from it, they're not looking at a lot of it being auto-configured. At GoDaddy, yeah, we would look at 80% or above to auto-configure, because our systems are completely data-driven. So we would hope that this would achieve that. And ongoing maintenance or changes is probably the only time I would see, it being useful in the EPP system. So.
Yeah. So, Jim Galvin speaking for myself here. Just to build on what Frederico is saying, I think that a distinction to make, another use case which we have in mind is the transfer of TLDs from one service provider to another. So there's a use case down the road. You can also imagine a use case of what happens just if an operator wants to make changes, to their operating details and the way that stuff works. So a point of discussion here is all of that, but what also factors in as a point of discussion is maybe there's a separation here. Maybe part of this document is just operational details and not the rest of the policy stuff. And that might be a split that we should think about in the way in which we should do it, because it's that operational stuff which would be more applicable in use cases down the road outside of bootstrapping.
Yeah, it's Jim Gold from VeriSign. So, I wouldn't give up completely on the configuration. I just want to point out, none of the registries except for VeriSign has this kind of feature at this point. And registrars don't have an opportunity to do this. And the fact of the matter is that as far as having it be centrally defined in the system or have it be aggregated, for me, source code is best followed by going directly to the source code. For me personally, I don't want to go to a Word document that's out of date. I want to go to the actual system and know what the connection policies are and the policies of the TLDs on it, which will be most authoritative. So my recommendation is to keep it as close to the systems as possible.
I don't have too much. It's Federico again from Nick.bi. I don't have too much to aggregate. I agree with that, but anyway, I think I would like better for us to spend a little bit more time in trying to improve the protocol from the point of view of the use of the basic protocol that we have. This comment is because it's a little bit sad from a point of view of a server operator, the way that small registrars treat the protocol. That it's very usual for us to receive calls from registrars asking to please clean my 500,000 pull message that I have not been treating for the last 2 years, and then receiving support calls that, oh, this is not working. It's obviously you are not reading the pull messages. It's impossible to work that way. So I don't know what we could do to try to improve this situation. And perhaps this server profile, or I don't know exactly the name we were giving, could help. But it's just a general comment. And
Okay. Any other comments, questions on the registry mapping? Jim, we don't have an actual IETF draft of this yet, right? Yeah. So that'll be our next step. Yeah. So.
Did you have the GitHub?
Yep. Yeah.
So there's actually two things in the next step. Jim Calvin speaking as chair. So you have you do have to make an internet draft out of it, and we have to agree as a working group to actually adopt this as a work item. And we can have a bit of that discussion when we're doing our milestone review in a bit, so a thing. But I mean, worst case, you create an internet draft, and then we just do a call for adoption on the mailing list. And that means you submit it as an individual, and then we'll, or maybe since I don't imagine anyone's going to object, we'll just let the first one come through as being named as a working group document, but we'll do a call for adoption once the first draft is out there and people can see it, just to save that step of having to publish it twice.
Okay.
It seems like a little bit of overkill. Okay. If there's nothing else, and I don't see anyone in the queue on the remote, so all right. So that takes us to a discussion of our a milestone review. We didn't actually call this out on the mailing list, but I'm hopeful that people did actually prepare for this meeting, and you looked at the agenda that was published and posted, and you realized that we were going to have this discussion. And so you've actually gone and you've looked and reviewed our milestones, and so you have some thoughts and comments about it. However, what I'm going to do here is move to showing in the media echo. I'm actually just going to go to the website to show the stuff that's there. So for people who can be on the website, you might want to just go do this. This is the first link, the About link. It's about our working group, and down here at the bottom, so you see our charter. And if you scroll through, you can see our milestones listed, which I think all fit on the display in one slot. So that's actually pretty cool. So let's just do a couple of quick words here on where I know we are. Actually, Antoine was going to try and walk through this. I'm just having, I apologize that I'm coughing. I've got a little bit of a chest cold, which is coming on me here. Antoine, you want to try and talk again, and maybe you can walk through this? Otherwise, I'll just keep moving us along. And I can see your lips moving, but there's no sound coming out. Yeah. All right. I think we're going to have to pass. Okay. So the obvious things, this is our milestone list for the documents that are currently considered working group documents. The obvious things that do have to change, of course, is, as you can see at the bottom, the one document, no, the launch phase document will have to be changed to published. So we haven't done any recent updates either. So we'll take care of that. The fees document and the change poll and the allocation token will all be changed to reflect that they're going to be published soon. So we'll update those dates so that it just reflects that they're going to be done now as part of doing all of this. We also have the going back down from the bottom, we have the couple of org drafts. We're going to have a brief discussion about them next after this. Lyndon, oh yeah, okay, so Lyndon's in the room here, so she'll come up and say a few things about those. Go ahead, Cal.
Message from Antoine. He left you a note on your phone that he'd like you to read out.
Oh. Oh. Yes, I think I did actually catch all of these things, Antoine. I don't. So okay. If you're at, yes, I did read your message. So let's get through all that. I'm coming up in the bottom.
We got the thumbs up. It's all good.
Okay. So those are the org drafts. We'll come back around to those. Then going back up, we have the DNS operator, our protocol document. Let me. The question is what we're actually going to do with that document, and where we want to go with it. The editor of that document, those guys have kind of fallen off the map here at the moment. So they haven't been pressing to move this document along. So I don't really know what to say about it. It's targeted for informational document, but it has kind of left our radar here. I know that the editor who had pen had some personal issues for a while, but I thought that he was back at work. So we actually don't know what to do about that document for the moment. I think that if we can't make contact with one of the editors, and if anyone here has a point of view about that document and wants to move it along, it would be helpful if you could, reach out to the folks there that are part of that. I don't see Jacques or Matt or Oliver in the room here for that document at the moment. So, but we'll keep pressing. I think if they don't want to step up and move the document along, we'll probably press them to drop it and we'll move it off is probably the thing that'll happen. Or at least park it for now. I mean, at a minimum would be the right thing to do so that it doesn't stay active and it frees up a slot for us to have another document to be visible. That leaves us the bundling document up at the top. Adam, this is a question in part to you on the bundling document. It was originally targeted for standard track. And we had the BOF about it, I guess, about a year or so ago, about having a bundling BOF instead. And under the idea that this document might move in that direction, we just kind of left it here parked. But now the question is whether or not if we could move that to informational instead and have it pushed out the door that way. And if you want to speak about that right now, you can, or if you want to take a few minutes and think about it, I'll just put that question out there for the moment. Okay. So some thoughts about that. Now, so that takes care of the items on here. So the questions to the group here, we'll come back to talking about org, but the question is updating these things to have sensible dates and milestones. So I think that leaves the validate out. We should consider whether or not the May of 2018 is a reasonable milestone for that and getting it done. If we want to extend that and push it out a bit, that's fine. And I think everything else is on track and under control here. We'll talk about org in a minute. So let's talk about the other documents that we have that are not here. We also have Scott's tag document, which is not currently listed, which has to be added to the list. So we need to talk about a date and a timeline for that. See if anyone has any suggestions or preferences on how they want to do that. And the object tag document. We also have a verification code document, which has not been officially adopted for us, but it's a candidate for adoption. So we have those two documents that we need to think about how to order these things. And Scott, please go ahead.
Yes, Scott Hollenbeck. Did you want to do that right now?
Yes, because that's it. As far as I know, that's the list of things. We have those two outstanding documents and some other stuff that'll come down the road.
So here's what I'm thinking with the object tagging document. I know, Andy and I have tried prompting some conversation on list, more than once. We did have some feedback from Patrick, which was along the lines of, I don't like the entire approach, but we didn't like his approach either. So what's in the document is going to stay there. The one thing I threw out to the list about a possible addition to the document that I didn't get a lot of comment on either way was adding some rationale to describe where the separation character came from. This wasn't just a random pick a character out of your nether regions type of a thing. It was, about trying to find something that is URI safe, not used in any other way, not currently used in current handles. And so that's basically where the tilde character came from. So having said that,
If I make that change to the document, at this point, I know of no other work that needs to be done there. And if there is no other comment or no other discussion, I'm going to suggest that this document is finished and ready for working group last call.
It is on standard track, right? It's not informational, correct?
BCP,
Okay.
because we're talking about an operational practice here as opposed to a protocol.
Okay. So I think, even for that document, I mean, I agree with Scott, as in terms of a process, if there's no comments to add to the review, then it can move along fairly smartly here. And there's no reason to hold it back. I mean, he can make the change that's there. We are going to have to do a working group last call and would very much going to need opinions and comments and advice from others, even if it's just I support this document, since we do have a single, very strong objection, or we're going to need for other folks in the working group to have a point of view about this. And I'll say more about why in a moment. Go ahead, Cal.
Just a comment from Antoine. He says that the document shouldn't be on the milestone list, only standards track on the milestones.
Okay. That's fine. And Adam is kind of get a reflex reaction. I mean, I wasn't, we can sort this out later. I had always thought you put everything on the milestone list, and you're nodding your head yes to that. Antoine was suggesting there that we only put standards track documents on the milestone list, but I don't know that distinction is too important. Do you?
Anything you plan to publish is on your milestone.
Okay, so Adam said anything we plan to publish is on the milestone list, so it should go there for tracking. So that's the way that we'll do that. Okay, so that takes care of the object tag. Oh, what I want to say is this is a small group, and there really aren't that many of us. In general, as chairs, Antoine and I have always looked at, essentially for unanimity, or for there to be essentially no objections to a document. And it is kind of hard. Generally, that's worked for us because we're such a small group. Just asking for, all of us to be part of something seems to work fine. And we've had pretty good success. But since we have a document here which has an objection, it's much more important to make sure that people acknowledge that they want a document and they have no objections to it. I need to give, if Patrick has an objection, he needs the opportunity to state that. But as chairs, we need for other people to comment on whether they support the document or not in order to get past that. Scott.
Scott Hollenbeck. If I'm channeling Patrick here, I think that we ultimately got him to admit that this was more a case of he would hold his nose as opposed to I object strongly. This was on list, so if I'm remembering this incorrectly, folks, please just correct me. But I think that's where we ended up.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Thanks for that clarification. So my reminder to people to at least acknowledge that you have no objection to a document is important whenever there is an objection, since we don't get that many of them in this group. We generally seem to have unanimous support for things, and that's a good thing. Okay. Excuse me, Oliver walked into the room. So maybe Oliver would like to talk about the DNS operator RR protocol document and indicate to us if it needs to stay on our milestone list or not. And if it does, you have to tell us what's going to happen, what the next steps are.
There is a minor topic that the editors have not been finding time to discuss among themselves, but after that is resolved, this will be a last call callable.
Okay, all right. So do you have an expectation on when you expect to pull that together? Because
I'll
right
make
now,
it happen next month.
yeah, the reason why I ask is the milestone list puts it at January of 2018, which was obviously a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
And it's okay. We just need to push that milestone date out to something.
June, July.
Okay. Why don't I just make it July to push it to the next IETF meeting?
Thank you.
Okay. So that takes care of that document. So that's that one. That's object tag. Validate. You want to speak to a suggestion for a milestone date?
This, Roger. Actually, let's keep it at May for now. I mean, I'd like to shoot for that to get the last document update done, and then hopefully we can move it forward from there. When it actually completes, I don't know, but I think the work should be done on it by May.
So this one also falls into the object tag category of, as long as there's no objections, and there hasn't been much discussion about it, it could just move forward smartly as soon as we've got it together. Okay. So the one other remaining question in all of this is to ask if there are any other documents and considerations to adopt. And wow, the list is lining up. Amazing.
There's only two of us.
Scott Hollenbeck. So I know I've talked about this one here in the past. I am currently working on an individual submission for RDAP that describes how federated authentication, can be used, for client identification and authorization. I haven't yet brought this to the group for consideration because it still has what I consider to be a significant hack in it that describes how this would work with command line clients like curl and wget. However, that situation has changed in the last few months because the OAuth working group is pushing something that they call the device flow. It's very much intended to describe a method for doing OAuth-based authorizations for devices that are UI constrained. And we're talking about a command line interface, so it doesn't get more constrained than that. So I've got my implementation team back home, working on trying to work the device flow into our existing implementation. And once they demonstrate how it can be implemented there, I'm planning on backporting software reality into the specification. All right. And so then, once I update the spec, I think that one will be ready to be brought to the working group for consideration.
So is that, looking down here on the list, is that your, this OpenID doc here?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, and one other thing to consider here, even though this is RDAP specific, for those of you who aren't following along in ICANN space with what's going on with WHOIS and the GD General Data Protection Regulation, ICANN is currently muddling over a number of proposals for dealing with tiered authentication in WHOIS. I'm really worried that they are going to adopt something for WHOIS that is somehow going to live far beyond its usefulness and somewhat taint what we can and cannot do with RDAP going forward. So that's another one of the reasons that I want to try to get this document, into working group consideration so that it becomes a little bit more than a figment of Hollenbeck's imagination.
Yes, that's a good point. And there are those of us who are going to constrain what they try to do to WHOIS. So they wait for the right thing to happen in RDAP. But, the community is the community. You never know in this world.
Yes, Jim Gould, I wanted to speak to the verification code draft. I'm going to just request that stay on hold. I'm not exactly sure what that means. But since we're the only ones implementing, we'd have to decide what we're going to do with it and whether or not there are other places where it may be used. But right now, I think it's a generic solution that's worthwhile proceeding if there is interest from other registries to do so. But right now, I don't see that happening. There are the data escrow, the data format drafts that I've talked to in prior working groups that I'm not sure whether or not there was an open question, whether or not those could be taken on based on the charter. But if they are, then data escrow and the data set format drafts would be requested to be added.
Right. And actually, I'll extend that list a bit more in a moment. Let me just recap where I think we are. So we have the object tag and validate drafts, which will move along smartly here as soon as we get another published draft. We have the DNS operator draft, which we will push out to July. And the verification code, you didn't actually give me a date. When do you want to push a milestone out for that? Do you have a suggestion for it?
I believe it's complete. The only issue is whether or not it could be standards track, considering we're the only ones implementing it with our registrar. So I don't think there's any more work to be done on it.
Okay. So that you're just saying it's ready for working group last call now, unless somebody wants to object.
That's right. Yeah.
So, okay. So maybe we'll just give it a publication date of May, like these other ones here, just to give us some time to get through working group last call and stuff, and move them along. And we'll see if there's any objections on the list to those. Okay. That leaves us with the set of other new documents that Scott had mentioned. The point that I wanted to get to in this is that we have now taken all of the documents that we have and the things that have come in front of us. And although we have a couple of quick process things to get through here, they're all going to shift off of our list to do here. Ideally this year, if all works out. The only one is the operator document, which is out there. Let me take a moment and let Lin come up and say what she wants to say about the org drafts, so that we can just add that into our summary here about where we are and our workload.
Sorry, I didn't prepare any slides, and I just want to give a very quick update on the org drafts. And we may know that the org drafts were originally designed for the reseller information displayed in the WHOIS, and then after a period of working group discussion, we chose to change the reseller object to the organization object. And I think we have done this work last year, and then we did receive some comments on the mailing list for the two organization drafts, and we have responded all the comments, and some wording and examples were updated in the latest new version, and the courses have been discussed for a while, and we thought that it might be a proper time for us to request a working group last call and to push them forward. That's it.
And to push them forward as informational, not as standard track.
Yeah, standards. They are standards track.
Well, we had originally taken them on board as standards track, and I believe well, maybe that's a question here for the working group to ask what people want to do. I had understood that people had pushed back and wanted them to be informational and not standards track. So that is the question that she's bringing to the floor here, as to whether we're going to publish them as standards or not.
Adam Roach. So I wanted to speak to a couple of things regarding the informational documents. The first is I heard something go by that sort of implied that you were hesitant to publish things as standards track if you didn't have multiple implementations at the moment.
I was going to
not
come to that question.
right. Well, and that's not a formal barrier for putting things into the first step of standards track, right? That's necessary for subsequent progression, but I don't think that's what you want to gate these things on. The other thing that I'm going to raise as kind of a flag is while the conversation hasn't been had, I know one of the things that we plan to talk about at the upcoming IESG retreat is the publication of informational documents that look like standards. And as I'm looking through those, they contain protocols, extensions to standard protocols. So if you do decide to make them informational, there might, depending upon the outcome of that conversation, be some pushback when it comes time to publish them. So if there's kind of a just on the bubble about whether there's, want informational versus standards, unless there's a pretty strong reason to put them informational, if they look like protocols, I'd kind of, recommend putting them in the standards bucket.
Okay, that's helpful. That's good to know. That's kind of been an issue for us here in talking about things. I admit, even for myself, I've always kind of fallen back on the idea that you should have multiple implementations to be on the standards track. Because I was about to push back on Jim on the verification code document. If they're the only ones that did it, should it be standards track or not?
Right. I mean, if you plan to progress them, then you want to do that before you put them further down the path. But first step, single implementation is fine.
So you can be proposed standard with the one implementation. So that's fine.
Right.
Right. Okay.
And I don't know if that impacts you had a question about the bundling draft. which I think was predominantly aimed at whether it was informational versus standards. And I think probably I would offer the same guidance in that.
Yeah, the bundling draft has a different issue. If you recall from the BOF that we had, it was more about whether or not the DNS community wanted such a thing to even exist as an internet standard, as a proposed standard. There was a lot of pushback in trying to create a bundling BOF that would allow us to explore this issue.
Okay. I don't remember the BOF itself. Was the discussion during
the
meeting,
BOF,
or was
and it
this external?
No, it was during the meeting.
Okay,
And-
so
and it was a year or so ago, a year and a half maybe at this point. It's been a while.
that would have been before I was your area director. Sorry.
Actually, I think that's true. Yes, you were not the area director at the time.
Okay, I'll talk to Alyssa about it then.
And
try
I
to
don't
get
even
filled
think
in
it
on
was
the details.
Alyssa who was. There was a quick change there between Alyssa and somebody else. There was some transition. Yeah, Barry. Yeah, we might have to take this offline to track the history and decide what you want to do there.
Okay, the notes that I had was that there was to be a list discussion on the topic. And when I did a quick search of the list, I didn't find anything, but I wasn't looking as far back as that, so I may have just missed it.
Yeah, so that's fine. I don't want to overtake any prior decision and try to remake it. My recollection, just as chair, is that that particular document had additional constraints or issues that were coming to bear on it. That document would like to be standards track, just like these org documents, which I think now, based on what you just said, we can move that forward, and verification. I guess I commend to you the issue of the bundling draft to make sure that we don't overtake a prior decision that's been made.
Okay, I'll sync up with you and Antoine and probably Alyssa and Barry as well, just to figure out what we need to do there, so we're not like going against previous consensus.
Yeah, that's just trying to be fair to the process here.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you. So what I've heard here in both cases, for verification code and for the two org drafts, go away. And the org drafts are these two here. Unless there is an objection, and it's a technical substantive objection, that those two documents are also ready for working group last call and moving forward. So they also will move off our milestone list relatively quickly here. I'm sorry?
The organization?
Yes, the organizational ones. Okay. And Antoine is reminding me to remind us here, even so, with these extensions and changes, let's not forget the IANA registry for registering extensions. So even if they're informational, they get to be put there. But these are going to be standards tracks, so we should add them there too, and those should come along. So we'll do a working group last call on those documents. So back again in summary, I think that leaves us with the DNS operator document. I think that's and the bundling, which we'll have to follow up and address later offline as to where to go. Scott offered up a couple of documents that had come down the pike, and I do want to offer up the following too. We don't have a large number of registrars that participate in this working group and participate here directly. Now, we've talked about this issue before, and so this is just partly a recollection for folks to bring it forward again so that you're aware of it. There are, on the other hand, a larger number of registrars that participate in the ICANN arena. We actually now have a technical operations group on the ICANN side where registrars are participating quite regularly and vigorously now. And we have a separate registry tech ops group, which is not quite as active, but mostly because we're here in this room for the most part. So that seems to be working for us. And we have a joint tech ops group for the groups to work together. The thing that I want to bring out is there are a number of specifications, technical specifications for operational concerns that are coming from that registrar community that since they now have a vibrant tech operations group, those things are under discussion and they're developing those documents. The intent is that since that's the place where that group is working, to let them do that work there, and then we will submit it here and bring it here to give it to the IETF for IETF control, for broader review and then ultimate publication. There is this, issue of coordination. It'll come to this working group, and we'll get to review it. And we have a fairly vibrant registry participation here, so we'll get to look at this stuff and then comment on it and review it in our usual process here. It is true that if we make any substantive changes to it along the way, we will have to coordinate back with that registrar community and that tech ops group, and the set of us who actually do participate in that group and in that arena, and there are a number of us here in the room, are all going to share that burden of making sure that that happens, since we just want to make sure that we keep that community involved in the things that are important to them. So there are a number of documents which are on the list that are going to come our way fairly soon. We actually do have, I think there's one down here already which we have not adopted, and I actually don't have it on my list, so it's gotten lost here. But there is an unavailable names document which has actually been through it is an internet draft. We'll resurrect that one. There is some discussion about creating standards for file names for reports that are generated between registries and registrars. So there is an existing document for that also. And there is some discussion going on now about a billing transaction format file. A file for formatting billing transactions, which the registrars would like. And it's just a way for them to reconcile their invoices. Those are the three things that come to top of mind at the moment, just to alert you to work which is coming our way. But Jim, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I want to bring up again, since these are file format documents that we're going to have to review the charter apparently, because I brought up about the data escrow in the past and the data set format. I just want to make sure that we're able to take on that work.
Yep. I'll speak to that very quickly. I have actually already talked to our area director, and since these things are all in the context of registration work, yes, your chairs will acknowledge that they have been negligent in doing this. We had actually agreed to it before, and I had at this meeting I raised it again with Adam here. We do have the ability to just tweak our charter a little bit. There's just a couple of phrases to change because we don't want to change the overall scope, but we want to lift the restriction from being EPP and RDAP only to being registration protocols with EPP and RDAP as kind of the example to help us keep us in scope here. So to the extent that these things are just for registration systems, we should be okay. And we do have to get that charter updated and make that happen before we can actually adopt these documents. We'll have to make that happen, and that'll have to go through an ISG review too and study. But we're now hot on a path to get that out of the way, since these documents are fast approaching when they're going to want to submit them to us. So thank you for that.
Alex, may I offer? I understand that participation of registrars in that group is pretty limited, and even participation of registries is, well, not the whole industry. However, I'm slightly worried by the fact that there is some specification work going on in a gated community, which is then supposed to be rubber stamped by the IETF to become an RFC. Yeah. So without paying the registry stakeholder group membership fees and being an accredited I can GTLD registry. There's actually no way to get into those working groups, yeah, which means that there is standardization work going on in a closed room that we subsequently get on our plate to rubber stamp. I'm not super happy about it, yeah. So we need to find a way to improve that situation. It's not the way the IETF typically works, yeah, and I'm like getting something finalized, agreed behind closed doors on our plate. To just stamp it with an RFC number is not the way the IETF typically works. Yeah.
So let me speak to that directly too. Very sensitive. I agree with your sensitivity to that issue and want to acknowledge that I'm very sensitive to it too, as are others. And we've had this discussion and you know, and I, yeah. And the intent here is absolutely not to take over the IETF process. Okay. That is not the intent. I know that people will be quick to say that, you know, they could just join our mailing list and they could participate here and do that. And I really do appreciate that. And for people who are part of the IETF, we get that that's how things work. The truth is we're just not getting them to do that. And they're not interested in doing that, registrars in general. And that's kind of unfortunate. My personal model about this is that I'm hopeful that if we get some success in moving some documents along, that will encourage and motivate more people to want to come to the mailing list, even if they won't come to IETF meetings. So that's my hope. And we'll have to see after we get a couple of these and get some successes under our belt, see if we can motivate that. At least from my point of view, I've certainly made it clear in those communities, and I'm sure Roger wants to speak to that, and maybe Scott will say something too here, and explain to them that no, the IETF is not going to just rubber stamp their work. We're taking advantage of the fact that there is a group of technical people who are willing to work on something, and we're just using that opportunity to get a, you know, think of it more as a design team than a closed community doing something. And they fully acknowledge and recognize that no, the change control comes to the IETF. It's coming over here, and it is subject to IETF review and consensus and change control. And that's what it is. It's definitely not a rubber stamp. So we get to apply whatever we need to apply to these documents and the review. Maybe I'll let you jump the queue for a moment to respond.
Quite frankly, I'm not sure whether the IETF process is the right venue for some of those documents. I believe, for example, that the format of a billing line of a registry, this is purely an inter-industrial, it's not a protocol, yeah? So if they want an RFC number, they can like invent something else that as an acronym forms RFC, yeah? But it seems like they want to crown some of the documents with an RFC number, yeah? But they don't want us to be involved in the development of that.
So I'll speak partly to that.
It's a tough problem. I just
Yeah, it is.
to mention my concerns, yeah?
No,
I'm more than happy if somebody else also works on improving interoperability. But for some of the work that probably will come out of those groups, a RFC document format is maybe not the right way. Yeah.
We can have that discussion with each individual document that comes forward. I'll just insert myself in the queue after others rather than trying to dominate the conversation. I have some comments about that, but go ahead, Scott.
Scott Hollenbeck. Actually, thank you for teeing this up because there's some things I wanted to mention about this too, right? Indeed, the process here is not one of throw an internet draft over the fence and, you know, bango, it pops out as an RFC. And directly to that point, I would oppose adoption of any internet draft unless there's an active document author that is working over here in this community, you know, that is willing to engage with this working group to deal with the discussion, the edits, and the kinds of things that have to happen to be part of our normal document development process, right? So everything everybody just said here, but if the idea is to publish a proposed standard using the IETF process, we have to follow the process, you know, from A to Z, not Z.
Thank you. Go ahead.
This is Roger. Yeah, and I think I want to hit back on what Jim mentioned. I think the intent of this tech ops group was not standards or any actually, it was a discussion group that designed something. And I think it was most important that, yes, there are smaller registries even and smaller registrars that are participating there. And if the larger registries and registrars hear them, they can actually help them get into the right direction, because a lot of the discussion is not technical, it's policy. So it actually, a lot of that work that comes out of that group ends up heading toward ICANN and getting into policy. But it's more of spurring the discussion, and where, since a lot of those people don't know where it should go, is directing it into those spots. And as Scott mentioned, I do see, if a technical idea comes out, that that person that was driving that will be over here in this group working it. So.
Yeah, and so Jim Galvin speaking for myself here as from the center microphone. I'm actually in favor of some of these things, although I take your point that they're not really necessarily IETF standards in a traditional protocol kind of sense. But certainly the IETF has standardized other things that are not necessarily protocols. I mean, APIs kind of thing, for example. For me, speaking as a registry, these things kind of fall into a category of, they do affect operations. I mean, it is a technical kind of specification, and there is value, and I think some significant value, maybe more so on the registrar side than the registry side, to have a uniform way to do this. Because it is important information and it does affect the overall operation of the system. So I'm generally supportive of moving these documents forward and having them here. Because the other question I would ask is, if not here, then where? The IETF in some cases, I mean, maybe you have to relax the lines a little bit for what's reasonable to be in the IETF, publication path. So we get to think about that with each of these documents. But on the other hand, I don't know where else I would put a public repository of a technical specification of this type. That's all. So, and Alex. I see our area directors coming up with some thoughts, but go ahead, please.
Quickly, until Adam comes here. Alex Meyerhofer, nobody prevents the CPH, TechOps group, or whatever of those groups to create their own document series. That's the recommendation for the format of billing lines.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Why does it need an RC number? No. Does the format of travel agencies exchanging bookings with airlines require an RC number? No.
Right. And I'll just put myself in the queue after Jody here, but go ahead first, Adam.
Adam Roach. I just wanted to make a couple of observations. The first is, we have done standardization of things that were pretty internal to systems. For example, SIP standardized a common logging format that is used exclusively between like a proxy and the file system and the tools that scrape things out of the file system. So it's not like this is well outside the spirit of what the IETF traditionally does. The other thing that I would observe is that if this group wants to put together documents and have them published, they can even get an RFC number on them as long as they work with the independent stream editor. So that might be a path to consider if there's like really strong pushback against doing it in this working group. Just wanted to offer that up as an observation.
Thank you. Jody, I'm going to release you from the queue here by pushing the big red button.
Just curious, can you guys hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
All right. I think that what we were trying to look for in this tech ops group, speaking to Alex's point of like reports and that type of thing, it's not really that we were looking for an RFC for the reports, an RFC number. We were looking for some place to put this document as an informational to say, this is how the registrars would like this to happen, so that when new registries come online and they ask for how would you like to have this done, we could point to this and say, look, this is what we have in the IETF. It's an informational, it's not necessarily a standard, but this is the way that other registries have started to take this down. Now, I don't think we were asking every registry to do this, but this is what we wanted to have for, as we know, there are supposed to be thousands upon thousands of new TLDs coming up, and I don't know how many registry operators there would be, but we would like to be able to point to somewhere to say, this is how we would like to see these reports formatted, etc. And that was the whole point of putting out the unavailable names list and the tiered prices list. I can't premium price list, I guess. So we could point to something to say, here's the document, it's in IETF. It's not an RFC, but it is an informational, and that is kind of a standard. And I'm using standard very loosely, but this is the way that registrars have been using this, and this is what registrars would like to have a new registry develop in order to keep, in order to bring on TLDs faster, quicker, etc. I'm not sure if I'm answering Alex's question, but
Thank you, Jody. And I'll also let you go.
Alex again here. I understand what you're after, Jody, and it's perfectly valid because it improves interoperability and everything. As I said, I'm just not sure. We have a very small group here, yeah, and that means we have very little reviewing power, yeah, for those documents, and we have a lot of existing documents which we need to push through publication process. So adding like a couple other more documents just because that's existing practice that registrars would appreciate registries to follow. I wonder what we can actually contribute, yeah, because there are fewer people here than there are in the CPH TechOps groups. Some of the people participate in both groups. So what can that group actually contribute, yeah? And how many people here are like in the position to review those 3 documents I think that you mentioned now, especially given the fact that they were unable to participate in the development of these documents before those documents were made available to the IETF. Yeah, that's actually what my problem is. Even if I would want to participate, I can't. Yeah? It's a closed door development. Yeah.
Okay, I think you need to exit the queue there, Jody, if you're done. I'm not sure how you. There you go. Okay. This is an important discussion, and I do think that we're okay for now. What I would suggest is I'm going to look to propose the charter changes on the mailing list, and let's use that as an opportunity to talk about this particular issue some more. It's subjective, Alex. I guess, speaking a little bit for myself here, not as chair. Again, I'm supportive of this process. We're trying to find a way to work more closely with a community of people that are not easily accessible. So that's one side of things, and you're nodding your head just for the folks who can't see you, and so that's the good thing. The second part of it is, we can have some discussion about whether or not the things that they're proposing really should be IETF documents or not. Adam brings up a good suggestion about, well, they could just put them in the independent stream editor and go that path. Speaking personally, I would rather that they come through this working group at least a little bit, even if they don't get much look, and then they go out to the IETF at large, because I'd rather they be known and visible to all of us than that they suddenly appear somewhere else. I like the idea of bringing them over here because I don't want to have too many places that I have to participate for the documents, but we can continue the discussion on the mailing list when we get to looking at the charter and think about that and see where we are. Okay, we have 20 minutes left. So that's the milestone review. I think we're in good place. We're going to clean up our milestones. It's going to suddenly become very short. We have some administrative stuff with a bunch of documents that has to happen over the next couple of months, but we should have a pretty thin agenda moving into July. But ideally, we will have some new documents that will come to us that we will work to adopt. So we'll have a new set of documents and things to look at coming into the next meeting in July. So, okay. On the agenda, we have one other. We actually already talked about the org documents. I kind of slotted them up front into the milestone discussion. So, is Gavin here? Gavin, yeah, okay, good. So let me bring up his slide here. There are slides that were loaded up there for folks who want to get them. And in the meantime, let me bring them up so I can show them off here. And let Gavin go ahead if you want to wait for your slides. Just give me a moment here.
Okay, thanks, Jim. So I'm bringing this to this working group because I think it's possibly the best fit for what I'm coming to talk about, in that it's in the area of registration operations. It's a kind of thought experiment or a straw man idea to kind of look at the way that we currently publish and retrieve registration data about domain names. We currently have a model which is very centralized. Some TLDs and some registries operate a sort of semi-centralized thin model. And what I wanted to do was think about a way of fully decentralizing the registration data for domain names. So this is what we're going to discuss today. So, okay. So just going to go very quickly through this, talk about where this came from, what the current situation is, what Who Am I is, think a little bit more about some of the impacts it might have, and then look at what might we do in the future. So the origin story is I was browsing Facebook quite late one evening, and a good friend of mine who now works at Affilius posted a link to an article on Circle ID about how GDPR was a terrible thing and eliminating Whois was going to be a disaster. And something just sparked in my head, it may have been the wine I've been drinking, saying, well, let's kind of, I was out of the box, so I thought out of the box. So I wrote this little comment on Facebook, which a few days later kind of translated into the next slide, which was an internet draft. I don't know how that happened, but the Facebook comment got turned into an internet draft. There was another version of this, which I published a few weeks ago, but it's pretty much as this is now. It's obviously there for anyone to look at. So let's talk about where we are at the moment. Move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So in most cases, registries operate databases of contact information. They all run RFC 5730. They all have a registrant, admin, tech, and billing contact for their domain names. I've done some research in kind of usage patterns of contact objects in registries by registrars. There's a great deal of duplication. There's a great deal of wastage. Registrars never delete contacts, and I literally mean never. So registries have huge databases of contact information. It's all low-level contact information, but they have a lot of it. And if they're a GTLD or they're a registry that publishes their zone file or a list of domain names, then essentially that database is freely accessible to anyone who wants it. All they have to do is just do a for each on every domain in the zone. And for a data subject, a registrant or someone who's been roped in to be the admin, tech, or billing contact for a domain name, they have zero transparency on what happens to their data. Once it goes into the registry, it disappears, and whatever happens to it, whichever third parties are accessing it, they have no access to information about what's happening to their information. Despite the capabilities that RDAP has, there is still no differentiated access really, so everyone has access to everything. Which means that there's absolutely no incentive for anyone who's being asked to submit information to this database to give any accurate data, other than gatekeepers saying that's not valid, please try again. And we know that Whois accuracy is not great. So that's the current situation with the registration data services that we have at the moment, whether that's Whois or RDAP. So Who Am I starts from a few basic principles. One, get rid of a centralized database. Two, tell the registrants, the domain owners, to publish the information in a standardized format. And Who Am I provides a way for a consumer of that information to go work out where to find it. The registrant, the domain owner, gets transparency on what's happening to their data. They can see who's requesting it. The protocol allows them to delegate responsibility for their domain to third parties in the same way that they do for hosting it or for hosting its DNS. And I also contend that all of the ways that Who Am I can fail are identical from a security or an abuse point of view to the ways that Whois fails currently. So it may not necessarily be an improvement on Whois, but it's certainly no worse than Whois. So there are three versions of Who Am I. And the idea is that an implementer of Who Am I, a client implementer of Who Am I, will try them in order, starting with a DNS lookup. So the operator of a domain name publishes a URI record at the apex of their domain, or under a tag that just says this is the URL you go to get my contact information. So obviously they can put whatever information whatever URI they like in there. It could be on their own web server. It could be on third-party server. They can put whatever they like in there. And then the client will just go off and does a web request to go and grab that and parses it and does whatever it chooses to do with it. It occurred to me after writing this that there's a second version of this, which is on the next slide, which is actually just put the whole thing in the DNS. Because you can take a vCard, you can encode it into base64, and you can create a data URI. So this avoids the need to have a file somewhere. You can just stick it straight in the DNS. And then it also avoids the need for the client to do a web request. So the client can just grab the data straight out of the DNS. If a whoami client does this DNS lookup, doesn't get anything from either of these two, then it can fall back to the third option, which is on the next slide, which is the well-known URL. And the specification, the draft does actually have a request to register this well-known URL. So that's basically the description of what whoami is. It's very simple. If you're writing a whoami client instead of a whois client, instead of working out which registry to go and send a port 43 request to, you just do a DNS lookup and see. If you don't get a DNS lookup, then you can go straight to this URL and try and get that as well. And if you get a 404, then you know that you've not got what you need. Next slide. So what does this mean for the different parties involved? For domain owners, they have the obligation to publish their own contact information. A lot of companies do this already. I mean, how many websites do you go to where this isn't already a requirement? Certain jurisdictions require that you publish it in human readable format. All I'm saying is let's put it in a machine readable format as well. The indirection allows you to use a third party, or for a third party to provide it to you as a managed service. If you register a domain name with GoDaddy or with any other registrar, they usually give you a free DNS service at the same time. And so they can insert that DNS record for you. Or if they're providing you a web hosting service, they can intercept the well-known URL and publish the information if you ask them to. There is a possibility at some point of providing some form of federated authentication. So a request to get this information sends you off somewhere else, in the same way that Scott's work with RDAP would send someone off somewhere else to get authorization from the third party before sending them back. Or you might have a HTTP authentication where you just say the authorization header just says email, and then you have to give your email address. It allows the domain owner to log who's accessing their whois information. So they know if they can correlate it to, I got an email, I published a whoami file with this email address in it. Someone from this IP address did a whoami query for it, and then I got a spam. So I know that IP address was being used to harvest information for spam. And then you could do clever stuff whereby you give different information to different people. Now, I'm not saying this is either good or bad. I'm just saying it's possible. But it might be that, if you're a big company, you might want to say, well, if you're querying us from Germany, then I'll give you the information about German office because they're the best people for you to talk to. Or maybe I'll give you a unique email address so that I know, again, can correlate abusive activity with email spam I get. What does it mean for registries? Registrars. So again, a registrar is already in the business of capturing contact information from their customers and giving it to third parties. Under this model, they don't have to give it away to third parties. They can keep it themselves, and they can publish it. They can provide that as a value-added service to their customers. So if they're selling a domain name that's under a policy regime that says we don't have thick whois, instead registrants have an obligation to publish accurate whoami information, registrars can step in and fulfill that requirement. And then finally for registries. So registries often need the contact information to validate credentials or eligibility, to make sure they know who the registrant is and that they have the rights to get that information. I don't think whoami prevents that from happening at all. So you could envisage a situation where the information is presented to the registry as part of the create command. The registry then validates it and discards it. Or that the URL or the DNS record is pre-published on the domain's name servers before the domain's created, and then it's checked in the same way that registry is often checked to see that there's no lane delegation before they create the domain. They can periodically poll it, make sure that it's there. They can respond to reports from third parties that it's missing or it's bogus, in the same way that they do with WHOIS currently. But it does take a great deal of burden away from the registries. They no longer have this huge database of personal information that they have to protect. It saves them money in operations and security and all kinds of other things. So that's kind of very high level what Who Am I could be. If we can move on to the next slide. Oh, the final one was for consumers. So you can still data mine Who Am I, because you still have a list of domain names, so you can still go out and query each one. You don't have to worry about rate limiting because you're not hitting the same WHOIS server every time. You're going out across the internet and getting it from all kinds of random places. So you could easily have a situation where a browser has an extension or some feature where when it hits the domain name, it then does the Who Am I query in parallel, same way it does a query for a favicon or something like that, and just displays it in the Chrome of the browser. How you might handle authentication when you're operating in headless mode, as Scott has talked about, is a question that I can't give an answer to here. But again, if there's bogus information or it's missing information, they still have recourse to the registry, and the registry ultimately can suspend the domain as a sanction for not publishing information in a regulatory environment where it's required. So yeah, so Who Am I could be abused, and I'm sure anyone in this room could think of a dozen different ways in which this proposal could be misused or abused. But I can't think of a single way where it could be abused or misused, which isn't already happening now in WHOIS. So, future. I mean, this is still kind of a silly toy. I'm not suggesting that we take this down the standards track or anything like that. But there are possible ways we can improve and enhance it. This is a list of some of them. So could we have different contact types? How would you retrieve information when the domain's not actually working anymore? And I haven't really done a formal analysis of security and stability. I'm slightly scared by the length of this queue.
Okay, let me just, I think that's the last slide, right? Yeah, okay. Just to point out to people, we time check, we got 5 minutes, and look behind you, there's 5 people in the queue. So you all get 60 seconds. Go.
Okay, Stefan Bortsmeyer, AFNIC. I think it's a good idea. You may look at the draft on security.txt, which relies on the same idea that allowing people to publish their own data. It would be cool to have some sort of things in common. I said it's a good idea to allow people to publish their own data. I'm more skeptical on the last part, that it's possible to replace the current RDS. A typical example of a problem in .fr, we don't publish the data of personal registrants, individuals, but we still need to have it in case we have to contact them. So UMI cannot replace that. But as a possibility, also for the web, there have been so many proposals to have some sort of humans.txt in the well-known, so people can publish in a structured way information. It would be cool to review all these possibilities to be sure that they work well with your proposal. But yes, I agree, I support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maglashe. Registrant information is something that people like to use for spamming. You said that. So people essentially, if, registries and registrar were not publishing WHOIS data, roughly speaking, I have some doubts that the actual registrants will publish their own data. Therefore, it might be a cool idea, but who is going to really use this, right? So I'm skeptical about the actual use.
So on its own, Who Am I is not going to solve, is not an end-to-end problem. It's it needs to come with a kind of policy environment that makes use of it. So there are certain norms that are enforced by policy in other areas, and all I propose is that if a registry made the decision that they wanted to go fully thin, they didn't want to publish any or store or publish any contact information whatsoever, they still needed a way of identifying who is responsible for a domain, who's the owner of a domain. Then they could implement a policy that says you have to do this, or you have to employ a third party to do this, and we will monitor it and we will take action where you fail to meet your requirements.
Scott Hollenbeck. A couple of things. And I'll try to go very fast since I've only got a minute. As I read through this, a couple of words kept popping into my head. Finger, web finger, right? It seems very similar in concept. You know, the idea that you as a user can self-publish some information and others can find it, assuming they know, you know, the right tool to use. But the other thing that I wanted to say is, you know, what you just described here in terms of the registry kind of being the enforcer of ensuring that registrants do something, that scares me to death.
I could imagine at your scale it would.
Right. No, well, as Mark was saying, getting millions of registrants to do anything, even if there is a policy club you can hit them with, it's a losing proposition. And I know that, you know, my company doesn't really want to have to be in the business of enforcing what a registrar's customers are doing or not doing. And I imagine the registrars are probably a little, you know, nervous about the idea of having to enforce what their customers are doing. But as an experiment, it sounds kind of interesting.
Yeah, and that's what it is, it's an experiment.
I'm going to put myself in the queue and then close the queue at the end.
Adam Roach. Oh, Adam Roach, as an individual, I wanted to make a couple of observations. The first is, so looking at DNS records, you have like a limit of 255. By the time you base 64 encode this and put it in URL, you're down to about 160. And if you look at your average V card, it's about 4 times that. So that. Oh, is it? Okay. All right.
So the draft has an example V card that fits in 200.
You don't have that limitation on the RD.
Okay. As long as that's not a problem, then that's not a big issue.
Just repeating for the remote folks, you're just reminding us that there is no restriction on the R data.
Okay. Thanks. The other thing I wanted to point out is that there is a lot of discussion right now about applicability of using .well-known for things that don't apply directly to the website.
Okay.
As opposed to, you know, like this is talking about the domain, not the website.
Yeah.
It's hardly a settled conversation, but I would encourage you, if you want to do work that uses .well-known, make sure you're on the art at IETF.org list. There's probably going to be a new list spun up to talk about this, but it would definitely bear on whether what you're doing is going to be permissible or not.
Yeah, and that's something that I'd struggle with as well, because if you didn't have a web server running on at the apex of your domain, but you had it on www or dub3 or something exotic like that, how would the client know how to get it other than using the DNS?
Bernie Hunheisen, actually, I just share the concern that Scott and the previous speaker were expressing that there's not really an incentive for users to put in that data, or maybe I don't see that incentive. Mm-hmm. And that may lead to incomplete or even inconsistent or wrong information, and also like enforcing that by policies, causing me some headaches.
I absolutely agree, but how is that any different from WHOIS?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so, and Jim Galvin speaking for myself, what I like about this is, I think as Scott was saying, it looks like a nice experiment, and what I have in my mind is there are discussions on the GDPR side of things about there is this distinction between legal persons and natural persons, and legal persons in some areas are required to expose some contact information, and it occurs to me that this could be a nice solution to that. You know, if your domain name is associated with legal person, you simply have to put the contact information out there for it. And that would settle everything. Then you don't have to do anything to the rest of the registration system. So that's at least my suggestion in all this. I kind of like it from that point of view. Are you, so now coming back to being a chair, you're putting it out here for right now. Are you going to ask for working group adoption here, or is that your intent?
I think it's going to stay experimental. So I don't think it's going to go down the standards track. I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with the processes of the IETF to know whether it needs to go. It may be that as a straw man exercise, just publishing it as a draft and taking it to a few different places is enough to get the conversation moving. That's really the idea behind it.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? I hope not. Go ahead, Cal.
Can I just make one final observation? In my opinion, the likelihood that this is going to be worse than Willis is much higher than it will be at least equal. Because today, who is covered by SLAs and there's a direct contractual obligation. You can't punish a registrar for failing to publish this because if they have an outage, the likelihood that they'll lose their domain because they've had an outage.
Yeah. That is true, but if a registry has an outage on its who, it affects every domain. If a domain owner has an outage on his domain, it only affects his domain.
But the registry has obligations. So the likelihood that they'll be out or this will be worse as an experience for the client software looking up is much it's much higher that you're going to fail in full live than with release. The likelihood, because you're not relying, you haven't established that strong base of people that can actually supply this information. It's actually much weaker if you spread that data out.
So Meet Echo has kind of ended on us here. In fairness to others, let me thank Gavin for bringing this up here. And I think that, as he said in the beginning, this thing would need to exist in some kind of policy context. So there's work to be done here and discussions to be had. And Meet Echo seems to be back because Antoine is there, so that's good. All right, I guess that's it. I don't really. Did anyone have any other business that they have to bring up, or can we end since we're already over and all the no's are going up? So that's great. Thanks very much, everyone. The blue sheets are out there somewhere. Somebody hold them up, please. Pass them to the front of the room. If you haven't signed in, please do. And thanks, everyone. Appreciate you being here. And Adam, if I could get 2 minutes of your time before you leave.
So I found it. It's called DNS bundle, but there weren't any minutes submitted on it. So I couldn't figure out. Thank you. Thank you.